So Easter is the day, in case you haven't heard, that we celebrate Jesus rising from the tomb after being crucified on Friday. Probably not new news to any of you. Now, celebrations have been going on at this time of year for millennia. And we did, in fact, just have the equinox last week. And this has been a time in many cultures to celebrate life, fertility, and the coming of something new. Now, the equinox is, did you know that's how we calculate when Easter is? Some of you probably knew that. So Easter is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the equinox. That's why it doesn't stay in the same place. It's all over the place, right? So sometimes it's all the way in April because the full moon, Anyway, so the full moon was on Wednesday. That's why. So there you go. Now you know. There's all sorts of celebrations happening this time of year. It's new life. So what does it mean, all of this mean in our 21st century lives? And more specifically, what does it mean for students of metaphysics, such as us, who are interested in delving beyond the basic story that's become the usual narrative? Because that's what we are interested in, no one. So there are many angles that we could go at. There's always. But I want to start with the simple acknowledgement that many Christian churches focus on the death and resurrection of Jesus. While in Unity and other New Thought churches, we're focused more on the life and teachings of Jesus. And that's, I think, one of the main differences that you'll find. So let's talk about definitions for a minute, because once we jump in, you'll be like, what is she talking about? So when you hear me or most other Unity ministers say Jesus, we're probably speaking of Jesus the man who had a body and, just like the rest of us, have a body. Life, personality, all that stuff. Christ is not Jesus' last name. Christ is not Jesus' last name. Christ is the divine idea of spiritual perfection. Doesn't apply only to Jesus. Now, Jesus Christ is the individual, the guy, the man, who most expressed the divine potential. That's why you put them together. And because he reached this level of understanding or expressing his divine potential, this is why in Unity we refer to him as a big brother or a way shower. Because that's what our, older siblings or cousins or whatever do for us. They help show us what to do, and they teach us all the nifty tricks that we need to know, right? So Christ is not the only name that we could use for this divine consciousness. We might say Christ mind, we might say Buddha mind, divine mind, the list goes on. There are many ways that we speak of a consciousness that has thrown away the illusion of the separation from God and is in communion, acting fully as God mind. So, back to the question, what does Easter mean to us in the 21st century? Well, Easter is a time of rebirth. It is also the time we have designated for the resurrection of Jesus, but it's also the time of spring here in the Northern Hemisphere. It is when we get symbols of fertility and growth, such as eggs and bunnies and flowers. Those were symbols of this time of year long before Easter happened. So you'd think after 2,000 years-ish of whys and hows of the meanings of Easter would have been sorted out by now, right? After 2,000 years, somebody would have figured it all out and got it all straight. But the debate continues, and I think this is a good thing because, we've evolved over the millenniums. We have learned new things. We have different perspectives than our ancestors on, pretty much everything, right? I'm guessing that you have an inkling of the truth of this, or you wouldn't be sitting here today. Now, Unity comes from a long line of thinkers who at some point realized that at least to them there was a different way to see theological matters and set out to find a new understanding. Now, when I think about, people who set out to look at a new theological thing, I think of Martin Luther, who said the Catholic Church at the time was quite corrupt, and he said, no, not going to do it. I think we need to look at these things differently. And this is a continual evolution of faith and theology that happens throughout time. So while some churches may teach that Jesus was the great exception, I and most Unity people believe that he was the great example. Now, I believe that he was a man who realized and acted from his Christ consciousness. I also believe that it's the goal of life to aim for expressing the most of the Christ consciousness in our lives. So, not only did Jesus do a really good job of doing it, he was an example, but that's the goal for all of us, and that's what we do with our lives. We may think that we have jobs and things like that, but the real job is to become more and more of who we truly are, which is to express our highest consciousness. Now, the good news about this is that Jesus' life was the example of how to become more and more of expressing Christ's selves. And the Gospels are like a roadmap. Now, here's the thing about roadmaps. They can show you every twist and turn, every potential obstacle, every single gas station, every dip in the road, and they may even tell you about certain potholes. Very, very helpful to have along, right? I learned that this summer. However, they can't get you where you're trying to go. You actually have to get in the car or take a step and actually move and do something and follow the roadmap. So, you can say Jesus did great stuff and I want to be like Jesus. But that doesn't get you anywhere if you don't, actually do something. And that's not always easy, of course, because there's speed bumps and detours and construction zones and all of that stuff. And there'll be times when you want to turn back, and there's times when it might get really tough. And you know what? When things get really rough, that's like when you're having your own crucifixion experience. Crucifixion is the crossing out of error thinking. It is the dying to old ways of believing and behaving. Any of you had a crucifixion experience? But the awesome thing is that after we have this crossing out of old ways experience, what follows is a resurrection, a renewal of new life. Just like after the winter comes the spring. Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, wrote in Revealing Word, "The resurrection takes place in us every time we rise to Jesus' realization of the perpetual indwelling life that is connecting us with God. A new flood of life comes to all who open their minds and their bodies to the living the Word of God." Say it again. The resurrection takes place in us every time we rise to Jesus' realization of the perpetual indwelling life that connects us with God. So there are many roadmaps to achieve Christ's mind, enlightenment, nirvana, whatever you want to call it. The story of Jesus' life is one of those roadmaps. One of the things that we can learn from the story is that we must die to the old way of thinking in order to embrace our true selves. But this is not the only lesson. It may be important, but I personally think that the examples from his 3 years of teaching should not be second fiddle to the story of his death. I should hope that that would be the truth for me as well, and for all of you. The story of our lives are pretty interesting. So, what I think many of us are looking for is an example of how to live, something to aim for, a roadmap for life's challenges. So let's look at another passage from the teachings of Jesus and see how that might apply to our lives, how that might be a little roadmap for us. And this is from Matthew 5, in the 40s. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do you not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Woo! Could do a whole series on that, right? So this is not probably the first time you've heard that or something like that, right? And this passage goes on to explain that the sun and rain fall on everybody. And could this mean that God doesn't play favorites? I know, right? So he was like, wait, are you sure? Yeah, God doesn't play favorites. This makes sense if we remember that God is not a separate entity in the clouds with lightning bolts ready to zap you if you screw up, right? If we remember that, and we remember that God is a universal energy that's within all of us, is all of us, then, well, how's God going to play favorites with that? Oops. So the passage goes on to say that if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Well, it's easy, right? Even the tax collectors who do, I mean, apparently the tax collectors were like the really bad guys in those times. So even they do it. So if you only greet your brothers and sisters, how are you stretching to be more Christ-like? Everyone greets their kin or the people who they think seem that are like them. The hard part, Jesus is saying, I think, is to see all beings, even those who look different, talk different, believe different, behave rudely, etc., as your beloved. I don't know, some of you might have seen in the news, you know, it's tradition for the Pope to wash the feet of people on Maundy, Thursday, as according to tradition, that's what Jesus did, is wash the feet of the disciples. And this year, he went to a refugee camp and washed the feet of 12 refugees after he gave a homily there. And I don't have the numbers, but those included Christians, it included Muslims, it included a Hindu, and I think there was a Jew. So, you know, so he was being an example that everybody matters. Everybody is part of the same family. So, you didn't think you were going to get out of here without homework, did you? So, this is a fun lesson. Those of you who took the metaphysics class, you've already done this homework, but that doesn't mean you can't do it again. So this week, because this passage is talking about seeing everyone as our kin, so in the metaphysics class, we spent a week imagining, so you know how in paintings you see people with the whole Holy Family has the big halo thing going on, right? Like a bubble head? Okay, so the homework is to imagine every person you come across, including people you see on the television or memes you see on the internet that make you irritated, to imagine every single one with a golden halo. A golden halo that reminds us of who they truly are, which is part of the Holy Family, just like you and I are. And a bonus assignment is that you got to remember to see that when you look in the mirror. Because sometimes we find it hardest to extend that understanding to ourselves. And I know that this could be challenging. But that's the point, right? If we really want to live that life and we want to become more and more Christ-like, then yeah, you're going to have to do a little work. Yeah. And I know that it might be a struggle because you might have some energy around a certain person being the bad guy. But you know what? They're a human making choices just like you, and maybe their choices are very different than the choices that you think should be made or that you would make. But if we want to follow in the consciousness footsteps of Jesus, then we get to remember that they have the same spark of divinity that you do. And to me, this is how we do embrace the teachings of Jesus and make them relevant in our 21st century lives. And as always, persistence and patience are the keys to success on any adventure, whether on a deep spiritual understanding adventure or the road trip of a lifetime. We have directional signs in the form of affirmations, and I have put, Bill helped, we put affirmations in eggs. So when you leave today, you can get a little egg, which is a symbol of life, right? New life. And it has an affirmation, which is a thing. And if you decide you don't like your affirmation, you can think about it. Like, do you not like it, really, really don't like it, or does it make you uncomfortable because it might be true? So, if it makes you uncomfortable because it might be true, I would invite you to really work it. Or you can start trading them around and stuff like that. So, and so my affirmation or my blessing for you all is may the Christ Spirit arise in each of you today and